Welcome to Disney Journey. I'm retired Imagineer Jim Scholl. I just got out of the movie theater where I saw Fantastic Four First Steps. As the movie was wrapping up, I just could not find myself thinking about anything else except could that movie be the property, the intellectual property, the MCU property that finally solves the problem of Tomorrowland in Anaheim, California? There's a lot to talk about, so let's get started.
As a retired Imagineer, I have to ask myself first, is there a story hook? Is there an environment? Is there something you'd create that would be so exciting that guests would have to pay money to go and see it? They'd want to pay money. So when you take Tomorrowland and add the Fantastic Four, maybe, possibly, that leads us to an idea to reinvigorate and refresh all of Tomorrowland in an aesthetic that comes straight out of the movie. And that's a good thing because when Disney has tried to reinvigorate Tomorrowland before, they didn't have this environment to draw from. I mean, after all, you're halfway there. Fantastic Four First Steps borrows from the design aesthetic of the original 1955 Tomorrowland. It enhanced it and it put it through a lens which is a lot better than 55 Tomorrowland really was. But you look at them and you can see they're close cousins.
Fantastic Four are a set of characters that have been in publishing for over 70 years. They've also had a couple of movies, although those have not been all that successful. But with the release of First Steps, finally there is a Fantastic Four movie that does depict that world, a world of the future, a fantastic world. And it might be the key to unlock the problem that Tomorrowland in Anaheim has had since it opened in 1955.
But enough about the caveats about what it might be. What it could be is something like this: the Future Foundation, a reinvigorated people mover, all coming together to create this environment, which is a retro future, which is going to be solving a problem that Disney and the Imagineers have had for a very long time. Delving into the archive shows just how much of a struggle it's been, because in the original early days of development, this was more of an expo hall version of Tomorrowland. It had some sexy elements like the molecule fountain right at the front door. It had a big water element, some of it which you'd walk through. Thankfully, there'd be a tunnel to keep you from getting wet. The sculpture of the molecule did not survive, except as a wall symbol on the Circle Rama Theater. Another unrealized idea was the molecule train. This was never built, not in this form. It did come to pass eventually in the World on the Move, where it became the Wedway People Mover.
When Tomorrowland did open in 1955, it was a showcase of the two ideas that have been in conflict ever since. The idea is whether Tomorrowland was going to be based on technology or vision. Vision you could see with the flight to the moon. But the expo hall at the front door of Tomorrowland was basically just a collection of technologies with sponsorship. People weren't that interested in the toilet of the future, but there it was. You might be interested in seeing what the Earth looked like from high above. But, that was going to be right next door to the art of animation. And so the problem with Tomorrowland that has plagued it to this day has been whether it's a land of business and technology or vision.
So without further ado, let's explore early Tomorrowland. My father, John Scholl, was a professional photographer, and he never met an environment he didn't want to pull out his camera and photograph to capture and document. So we have these photographs that he took of early Tomorrowland. As a result, it's good to look at it to realize just how different it was. Not just the plants, which were still growing in, but the environment, the showcasing of technology. It was a big deal because before it became the world on the move, it was still a world of science and technology. And it evolved a lot of ways, like we lost our fountains and the fountains became planters. But the idea remained the same. It was a showcase of what was around the corner in the future that we would all someday be able to enjoy. At least we hope so. Walt was a proponent of the future, and it led to the flying saucers, which was a much beloved attraction, which I brought back or was part of the team that brought back, for Luigi's flying tires there at Cars Land. The same with the test track, or, well, not test track, but people mover, which is kind of a test track. It was using test track technology for the rocket rods, at least. But when the Wedway was built, it showcased a lot of rubber tires that move people down the track. By the way, this is still technology being used today for family launch coasters. But back then, it was a skyway, a way to look over all of Tomorrowland in a long, luxurious, restful, family friendly attraction, which I would really propose bringing back if they did a fantastic 4 overlay for this new Tomorrowland. New vehicles, a shortened track, and secure restraints. And bing, bang, boom, you've got the People Mover back again. After exiting the People Mover in our old Tomorrowland, we can enter the Carousel of Progress to learn about Progress City.
At the end of the Carousel Progress show, guests were invited to go up the speed ramp, where there they'd be able to see for themselves on the second floor the WED-built model of Progress City. This was Walt's vision of what Epcot Center would be. As we know, it didn't happen, not that way. The model itself was, well, some of it was lost to the sands of time, but bits of it can still be seen even today in Tomorrowland and the Magic Kingdom. The building itself went on to be used for many reasons and many different purposes. Some of them not as intended as they might have been. But I remember going up there and walking around and visiting people in their offices that were carved out of the vacant space. You've never had an office where you've had curved walls until you've been up there. Also, you'd have to kind of time your conversations because behind some of those thin plaster walls, you could hear the sounds of the super speed tunnel. And it was functional, but it was not ideal. And definitely not a vision of the future.
But it would be the vision of the future that Tomorrowland was stuck with for quite a while. There were multiple attempts, one big one, which failed, but then this one I was involved with. It was Imagination and Beyond, where the color palette of Euro Disneyland's Discoverland came to Anaheim, which was not a good choice in retrospect because the warm tones in the sun of Anaheim really conflicted with all the golds and the brasses and the greens that really work well in France. There were some things that sort of kind of work well, at least for a while, like the rocket rods, taking the old People Mover track and putting a new ride system on it. This new ride idea was you'd go really fast. Unfortunately, with the turns and the angles and the close tolerances inside the buildings, fast was not really the reality. I mean, you could go fast a couple places, but does that make it a high-speed thrill ride as it was marketed? I don't think so. Plus, the maintenance nightmare of all the tires and the other issues that were associated with it meant that rocket rods had a brief, if memorable, life. The history of California's Tomorrowland shows that it's always been a struggle between vision and technology. And ideally, you want to get them in balance, because when they are in balance, they can complement each other. But it never seems to be the case. And as a result, there's always been that conflict. And no matter what is done, it never seems to really fix the problem. In 1967, there was the World on the Move version. Since then, there were just a lot of patchwork approaches to Tomorrowland. There's never been a clear, overarching vision of what this place could be. Tomorrowland has had some great attractions over the decades, but overall, the land is sort of like operating a boarding house. The landlord owns the house, but you have multiple tenants, and maybe they're not the people you'd really want in there, but you don't have the ability to get the people, all the people that you do want. And as a result, you have this piecemeal approach. An inner space comes out and a Star Tours goes in. A Carousel Progress comes out and an intervention goes in. As a result, you end up with this collection of elements, and they really don't talk to each other. A Buzz Lightyear is fun, but isn't that a fantasy future? And it's Pixar future at that. Star Tours, well, that's Lucasfilm. Space Mountain is its own thing. Not to say they're bad,
For the knocks against Tomorrowland that it does not have a vision, it does have a purpose. And the purpose is it has a murderer's row of capacity. Over the decades, it's had a really good lineup of ride shows and attractions. There's always a reason to go to Tomorrowland. Some of them really don't make any sense because they're more fantasy based, but they are there. And for a park that needs ride capacity, Tomorrowland always delivered on its mandate.
And Tomorrowland created memories. Even though it's been gone for decades, Adventure Through Inner Space, you still talk about it. Star Tours is still there. Innoventions, well, that's not there, but Utopia is, through all of its permutations, and it's been there since the very beginning. Also, it's not a beginning attraction, or a thing, or an element, but we'll always have Spaceship Mickey. You gotta love neon. The only time that there's really been a successful reimagining of Tomorrowland is when they abandoned the idea. Discoveryland at Euro Disneyland was based on a vision of a land, an entire, complete, cohesive unit. It was all about not a real future, a possible future, and a future that was articulated and designed by one particular individual who just so happens to have been French. And of course, I'm speaking of Jules Verne.
Basing any Tomorrowland on technology is a path of failure. The best you can do is a glimpse into the near future, around the corner future. And when Disney's done that in Tomorrowland with Innoventions, by the time they get set up and a year has passed, that technology, which is a glimpse of the future, has now become the present. And nobody wants to see the present because you live there. In the case of Tomorrowland, the only way really to solve it is to tie it to a vision. And the best example I can give is Discoveryland. Because in the case of Euro Disneyland, they substituted Tomorrowland for Discoveryland. And they substituted a near future for a past future. They had a visionary who happened to be French, and that was very convenient considering the park was being built in France. Jules Verne looked at the future through a glimpse of what was possible through the technologies he had available to him at that time. But when he did that, he wrote great yarns about going into space or under the sea, and that became the foundation for what could be delivered in France in Discoveryland.
And the clear foundational idea grounded everything, including the architecture. When you look at it, you can see the ironwork, you can see the rivets. Of course they're rivets, because it's of the world of Jules Verne. And when you look at the land today, even though it's drifted from Jules Verne, there's still a lot of it that's still grounded in that overarching idea. Even Hyperspace Mountain still is Space Mountain, and we call it that today. No matter what happens, it still holds up that if you have a strong idea, you'll have a good outcome. Which is the reason why Tomorrowland needs a good outcome, because it doesn't have one overarching vision. It could be that the Walt Disney Company and its investment zeal is willing to put money toward Tomorrowland. They are certainly now with the expansion of Avengers Campus, which is coming up as quickly as it possibly could. That's going to be a stake in the ground for Avengers. But Tomorrowland still needs something. And they've thought about it in the past, what it has. They looked at Tomorrowland. The George Clooney film underperformed. And while Fantastic Four First Steps isn't exactly printing money, it has been embraced by people. And that's a good thing. Overall, the idea is, if you want to save Tomorrowland, whether it's through the Fantastic Four or some other idea, Jules Verne, you gotta have a strong belief, a strong idea, and a willingness to spend capital to realize the idea. Until you come up with those two things, what you're left with is a kit of parts, an environment that you add to over the decades, but it doesn't have a cohesive whole. You may have fun. However, Tomorrowland will still lack a cohesive vision. So, we wait. We wait to see if the paint stops peeling on the construction wall of the new entrance into Tomorrowland. We wait to see if they ever embrace the Fantastic Four. We wait to see if they'll ever bring back the space bar or any of the other elements we love, like the yacht bar or the phantom boats. I do love a good Phantom boat. And we wait to see if the space couple will ever come back. But whatever they do change, I hope they keep this old mailbox, because nothing says Tomorrowland like looking at the past. As long as the past is one that's enjoyable and fun. And let's not forget bright, colorful neon.
My dashboard shows my fantastic car needs a new charge. So for now, we're going to bring this episode to a close. I'll have another new episode of Disney Journey next week. In the meanwhile, if you haven't already, be sure to like, subscribe, share, and consider becoming a member, just like these good folks. Their support of this channel keeps me going and keeps me bringing you new episodes every single week. In the meanwhile, until next time, it's goodbye from Lost Canyon.